Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be discussing the 7 Ages of Paris by Alistair Horne. And generally speaking on this channel, I've generally only recommended books that I think you should read. I don't normally review books that I don't recommend. So today is going to be a review of a book that I generally don't recommend. Now, this isn't to say that Alistair Horne is not a fantastic writer, a deeply thoughtful historian. The problem is he just doesn't understand France at a fundamental level. And let me explain. I'll start with something a bit easier. America. America's not been around that long. It's only been around a couple centuries. Let's call it 300 years if we want to be very generous, because we can include the colonial era and the monarchy as part of the history of America, certainly. We can even go further, talk about the Spanish and French parts of America. But let's just say roughly 300 years, America as an idea, as a collection of peoples, which eventually then molded into a country. Could you try, if you wrote a 400-page book on American history, and you only passingly referred to Puritans, just as in the background, maybe as clothing. You know, Puritans like wearing black, and you'd mention that, yeah, Americans wear black sometimes. How could you then understand all of these things? That understanding Puritanism provides you with a key to understanding many aspects of American life. So, starting with the prosperity gospel that's preached by Joel Osteen. He's only a recent person from many other people before him, that God wants you to be rich, and here are all these Bible verses where you're supposed to be rich, and by the way, give me money so that I can be rich so that you can be rich as well. That's a crazy idea. Or our hang-ups about alcohol leading to prohibition, or our squeamishness talking about sexual issues, or our winter is coming work ethic, work, and then one day you die. If you try to explain this to people and say, Americans do all these things, don't know why they do it, but they do these things, you'd have a pretty idiotic book of history. But once you understand Puritanism and you understand it's Calvinistic in its roots, predestination, you're supposed to work, you're supposed to be sober, no fun, no joy, no dancing. Once you understand that that's deeply embedded into the American DNA, even to this present day, then you understand all the other side effects that come with it. And along with that, foreign policy-wise, you're a city on a hill, so you're supposed to take care of the other nations because God has given you a divine mission. Imagine trying to understand America without understanding Puritanism. That is what Alistair Horne proposes that you do with going through, as he does, 1,000 pages, 400 pages, 1,000 years of French history, and not really talking about Catholicism. France is incomprehensible as a country, as an idea, without Catholicism. That is just a fact. And this country is full of church steeples. Every day, to this day, in atheist laïcité France, the bells ring out for the Angelus at least once a day, sometimes 3 times a day. In my small town here, south of Fontainebleau, the bells ring 3 times a day, 4 times a day. Also, it rings at 3 o'clock. So, even in atheist France now, the bells still ring in the church steeples. There are cathedrals everywhere. There are roadside shrines everywhere to Our Lady, to the Passion, to crucifixes. There's a nonprofit called SOS Calvaire, which goes around restoring these different Calvary scenes all along the roadside. There are Marian shrines all around the country. The driving out of the English during the 100 Years' War was led by a young girl who was said to have heard voices from St. Michael and other saints. Understanding France without Catholicism is just a succession of events. It's just some stuff that happens, but there's no coherence to it. It would just be the same thing if I just gave you a bunch of American history and I didn't give you Puritanism as part of the key to understanding it. You wouldn't really understand American history. And yet Horne, because he's clearly an anti-Catholic, he doesn't really get into this. And now what I mean is he's not frothing at the mouth, oh, Catholicism's the devil, and let me tell you why. But he simply treats it like a garment. As I say, it's just a shirt that some French people put on, and then they take it off sometimes. But it doesn't explain, as you can even look within recent French history. So from the Revolution, you have a move towards an empire, which is even stronger than a monarchy, which apparently the revolution was supposed to end, and then a restoration, and then another empire, and now the Fifth Republic, which is one of the most robust republics you can find. The president of France has powers that other presidencies would dream of, that the American president certainly doesn't have, even though France is a small country in comparison. But understanding how do you get France? How do you get a Feast of the Assumption? August the 15th is still celebrated as a national holiday in atheist France. Why? Because it was a miracle prayed for by Louis XIII and his wife. They had gone many years without children, and they needed an heir, and they prayed, and they led processions, and they had a miracle baby. The miracle baby was Louis XIV. Louis XIV is another affair. He's one of the ages which I think are correctly identified. So the 7 ages are Philippe Auguste, Louis XIV, Philippe Auguste, Henry IV, Louis XIV, Napoleon, the Commune, treaties of Versailles, and then de Gaulle. So I agree with 5 of those. I think it'd be silly to try to understand French history without understanding Philippe Auguste, Henry IV, Louis XIV, Napoleon, and Charles de Gaulle, sometimes called Charles the 11th by people. But the Commune and the Versailles Wars, I'd be willing, if he was willing to fret what I've come to really see, 3 wars, the Franco-Prussian War, World War I, and World War II. Those are 3 wars that are connected on one through thread of Alsace-Lorraine and the tension between these 2 kingdoms, empires, countries, that it took a long period of time. It was a new 100 Years' War, if you want to look at it, but not against England, but against Germany this time. The Commune, I think if you just dedicated one chapter to talking about Catholicism and what its impact, for good or ill. Again, I'm not asking him to be a Catholic historian. I'm asking him to simply be a historian. And the fact that he manages to know so much about French history and yet so not get what France is and what is at the heart. Why have so many French people believed in this religion for so long? Why did it, even when it was, an atheist republic under Louis Napoleon, go to the defense of Pius IX, the Pope? Why did French troops go to Italy to defend the Pope? It doesn't make any sense. Unless you understand how deep Catholicism is. And why is it deep? Is it just some brainwashing that happened? It's just some clothing that some French people take on and take off whenever they feel like it. It's something deep. Why are there so many saints of the Catholic Church that are French? Why has so much of church history have to do with France? You have ecumenical councils that were held in France. You have the Avignon papacy. The only time the papacy has existed outside of Italy was in France. The Pope has been kidnapped by a French emperor. The French have signed a concordat with the church. All of this is ignored by Horne in his book. And so that's why I say you can't, probably the one that I haven't mentioned just because it's so grievous and so obvious is always talking about the grievances of the enemies of the church, but never talking about what those enemies did. So, as usual, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre is brought up, but never, and you'll find, you'll get a blank look. Ever ask a French person, St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, that was so bad, Protestants were killed by Catholics. Okay, do you know that Protestants were committing atrocities against women and children that were Catholic? And I go, oh, really? Because they're only ever told the one thing. They're only told that Catholics killed Protestants on the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. They don't say, well, where did that come from? Where did this rage? And I'm not justifying it. It was murder, and those people will be judged for what they did. It was not sanctioned by the church. Those were bad actors. However, it wasn't simply a rage day. It was in reaction to actions from Huguenots. Same thing with the Albigensians. Horne goes, oh, the poor Albigensians in the south, they were murdered. Don't talk about what the Albigensians did, leading raids, murdering Catholics. Same thing with the Jansenists. Oh, the poor Jansenists, they were looking for a pure form of Catholicism. They were telling people, like, not to go to communion for years. So all these people were inflicting harm, but it's only the church that's ever bad. And yet, even though this church is so bad, Horne doesn't talk about it at all. 7 Ages of Paris, some might say, well, Stephen, it's about Paris. I'm like, but Paris is so much related to what France is. It's been the capital for so long. And for any of us who lives here, so many things run through Paris. To talk about Paris, where Our Lady appeared, miraculous medal was struck in Paris. You have St. Vincent de Paul. You have St. Madeleine Sophie Barat, St. Marie-Louise de Marillac. So many important saints here in France doing things that Horne manages to miss, in part because he doesn't want to see the reality, that there is no France without Catholicism, at least not the France that we know of, and to try to put together a history of France that ignores Catholicism or sidelines it is incoherent. And the same way that trying to explain America without Puritanism, for better or for worse, is incoherent. So a historian worth his or her salt has to look at the context that they don't like. And this is one of them. France without Catholicism is not France. And even today, as it tries to deny what it is, there are still Angelus bells ringing. August the 15th is still a holiday, as most, I think there are only 2 non-religious holidays in this allegedly atheistic country. So 7 Ages of Paris, not recommended unless you already have a robust understanding of Catholicism in France. This is going to give you an incomplete history. And just like I would not recommend people read a book about American history that doesn't have Puritanism, unless you already have that knowledge, then you can gain that supplemental wisdom, which is what I did. I already have a very good understanding of the role Catholicism has played in France, and I want to continue to grow in that knowledge. This gave me some supplements around it, but it was so obvious, the whole here. So if you're already familiar with the role of Catholicism in France, then I can recommend it as a supplement. If you haven't, then it's an avoid, because it's just missing. He doesn't get it. And that's one of the challenges that any of us who are growing or developing as intellectuals, we have to look beyond the idea, well, so-and-so is so smart and so-and-so is learning. And if you look at the bibliography and you look at the endnotes, footnotes for this book, they're extensive. It's not true that he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a very learned and thoughtful writer. But because he doesn't understand an aspect of what France is, then it makes this book, mitigates the value of this book. So you have to get over the fact that sometimes the intellectual mentors and the people you value in your life, they may have blind spots. That doesn't mean they don't have wisdom to give you. It doesn't mean you shouldn't listen to them, but you should keep in mind and be aware of what that blind spot is, and that can help you get the value and leave the rest behind. And so that's the end of my first review for this channel, in which I don't recommend the book generally. But if you are interested, for the reasons that I mentioned below, there's a link to get it from Bookshop below. If you like this video, please hit like, hit the subscribe button so that you can get new videos, or if you'd like to go back and look at older videos that I've done, in which I generally do recommend books, please feel free. And if you want to support this work, I have a link to my Patreon below where you can do just that. Until next time, enjoy your reading.